Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maika Sanderson, and I am the Grant Program Manager for the Farm to School Grant Program. I want to give you all a hearty, warm welcome to our, part one of a two-part series on the FY19 Farm to School Grant Program request for applications. We're super excited to be releasing this additional funding for folks to access and do fantastic farm to school work in their communities. And we want to make sure that you all have the tools that you need in order to successfully submit your application. And in tomorrow's webinar, you'll learn more about how you can successfully develop and put together and compose a really compelling application. So today I will also be joined by our grant officer, Carla Garcia. Carla, do you want to say a quick hello to folks?
Yes. Hi, Maika. Thank you. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Carla Garcia. As Maika stated, I'm one of the grant officers at FNS. I work for the Grants Operation and Management Branch at FNS. I will also be assisting through the presentation today. Thanks, Maika.
Thanks, Carla. All right, we have a pretty jam-packed agenda today. There's lots of great information to share with you all. So I want to make sure that we get started. So a quick few housekeeping things. As you all might be able to already tell, you are unable to kind of speak over the line. So any questions that you may have regarding the content of the webinar, please make a comment in the chat box, and we will make sure to answer questions at the end of the presentation. The other important thing to note is your audio is through the computer. You won't be able to hear my voice if your speakers are turned all the way down, but hopefully this second bullet will flag for you to turn up your speakers if you are having difficulty hearing us. This webinar will in fact be recorded. I engage the recording, and we will make sure to post it on the Farm to School website on the Grant Applicant Resources page. You will find not only a link to the recording, but we will also make sure to post the PDF of these slides so that folks can reference it later on when they're preparing their applications. So in terms of today, what are we going to be going over? I'll be providing a little bit of background information on what is Farm to School. I'll be giving everyone a bit of an overview specifically of the USDA Farm to School Grant Program, as well as kind of laying out the basic structure and paths through which you can apply. And then I'll be turning it over to Carla, who's going to go through some of the nuts and bolts of actually submitting an application on grants.gov. It's a multi-step process. And it's really important that you understand kind of now at the outset of the process how to actually submit your application, because it can get pretty complicated, and at times folks put together a fantastic application and then they're unable to actually submit it successfully and it doesn't get considered. So we want to make sure that doesn't happen to you all. So we give you guys some really fantastic instructions. So we're going to hop into what is Farm to School, and as you all, I'm sure, already know, the Farm to School Grant Program is really focused on how can we increase access to local foods in the Child Nutrition Program. So the National School Breakfast, School Lunch programs, the Summer Food Service Program, and the Child and Adult Care Food Program. And we understand that not only is it about actually getting more local foods onto the plate in front of kids, but also really making sure that they understand where their food comes from through agricultural education as well as experiential activities, so that it is much more familiar to them and appetizing. And we all know that a healthy, well-rounded diet, including vegetables and fruits and local proteins, really is the basis for building our next generation of strong students. So some key concepts for the Farm to School Grant Program is we really want to make sure that school children, K through 12 children, have regular access to locally sourced foods. I want to be clear that sometimes the question comes up like, well, what is the definition for a local food? So I want to clarify for folks there is no federal definition of what constitutes a local food. That definition is really made up at the local level. So you all really determine what is considered to be local food, whether it's within a certain mile radius, within the state, within a multi-state region, really just depending on what foods are grown in your area and what's available and accessible and what season it might be. So that definition of local is determined by you, and as a matter of fact, during the course of a year it can change depending on what is just available for harvest at the time. We find that Farm to School is really the most effective when the changes are made both in the cafeteria as well as throughout the school learning environment. So again, it's not just about getting local food on the plate, but really making sure that students have an understanding of where their food comes from, that they're having experiential activities, engaging them in agricultural activities, and really piquing their interest in local foods so that it can be more appetizing to them, and that when those foods are put in front of them, they're also enjoying and consuming them. So we also want to be clear in terms of kind of, like local food and the folks that are involved in the process. Farm to School really is taking a look at the community food system level, and there are multiple players in a community food system. It's not just producers and schools, but really thinking about the targets of who we want those foods to get to, but also all of the middle players, so the manufacturers, the distributors, the processors, the folks that are kind of taking that raw product from the field and processing it so that schools can actually incorporate it into the recipes that they're using. How is that food moving from the farm into the school? So we recognize that there are multiple players across the food system that make Farm to School successful. So when you are developing your proposal, really taking a look at your community and what are the obstacles and challenges in terms of really moving that local food from the land to the school food plate is really key and important. So this grant program is really thinking of tackling issues that span across the food system. So another thing I wanted to flag, and I think I've kind of done that so far, is that local foods really span the meal tray. We're not just thinking about local fruits and vegetables, but that also includes dairy and grains and local proteins. So we really want folks to be thinking about local foods that really touch across all components of the meal, and not just getting stuck in what comes to mind at first, which is often fruits and vegetables. So why does Farm to School matter? And I think that a lot of the folks that are joining us on this call and presentation already know the answer to this, but there is a growing body of evidence in the scientific literature that shows us that Farm to School really helps kids to be more willing to try new foods, and it really helps to increase the consumption of fruits and vegetables. As well as Farm to School has been shown to have really pretty incredible positive economic impacts on the local economy by giving producers additional market opportunities by getting their products into schools. So, as one of our fantastic partners, the National Farm to School Network, always says, it's really a win-win-win across the board when talking about the Farm to School Grant Program and its achievements. So we're going to transition now into providing you all with an overview of the USDA Farm to School Grant Program. I think I have a sneaking suspicion that many of you probably are pretty familiar with our grant program already. Possibly have already applied in the past or more than once in the past, but nonetheless we do typically have a few changes from fiscal year to fiscal year, so it's really good to just make sure that you're grounded in kind of the main structure of our grant program and the request for applications. So giving you all a little bit of background. So the Farm to School Grant Program, its authority really originates from Section 18 of the Richard B. Russell National School Lunch Act. In that particular section of the NSLA, it establishes a Farm to School Grant Program. And the real purpose, as I had kind of highlighted for everyone at the top of the presentation, is to improve access to local foods in eligible schools through grants and technical assistance. So the USDA team that's responsible for operating the Farm to School Grant Program is the Office of Community Food Systems. So the Farm to School Grant Program supports a number of different types of activities. It ranges all the way from training and support operations to providing funding to support planning of a full-fledged Farm to School program, purchasing equipment, developing the critical partnerships that are necessary for a Farm to School program to be successful and to create that vision, as well as kind of scaling out existing Farm to School programs. So perhaps a program has already been started, but you're looking to scale it across a district or increase the number of schools that are touched by that particular program. The Farm to School Grant Program is a great fit for any and all of those kinds of activities. So it's hard to believe, but we are already celebrating 6 years of Farm to School grants, which is really exciting. So since our first year of providing awards or providing funding for Farm to School through the Farm to School Grant Program was in fiscal year 2013. And so to date we've awarded 437 projects. We've actually funded and touched all 50 states, which is really exciting, as well as DC, the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and Guam actually as of this last cycle for FY18. So we're really pumped to have touched the entire nation at this point. We've given out about $30 million, which is pretty incredible. And as you all probably are already aware, our grant program is incredibly popular and in high demand, which is really exciting to see that there's so much interest across the nation in doing this work. To date, we've received nearly, well, I should say over 1,900 projects that have sought about $140 million. So as you can see, our award rate is significantly lower than the amount of demand that we receive, and that's just because annually we usually have $5 million available for funding. But what's really exciting is this year we, through the FY18 Omnibus Bill, we got some additional monies to give through the Farm to School Grant Program. So for the FY19 cycle, which is what you all will be applying for, there will be approximately $7.5 million available to fund projects. So we're really excited to be able to provide 50% more funding than we typically do annually. We should be able to fund more projects throughout the nation, which will be great. So general eligibility requirements. So we wanted to make sure to go through the eligibility requirements for applying to the Farm to School Grant Program so that folks are very clear about who is able to potentially tap into this funding. So we have a number of entities, 5, that are eligible for this particular funding opportunity. So one would be eligible schools or school districts. And so what do we mean by an eligible school? So we're really looking for school food authorities that participate in the National School Lunch or Breakfast Program, pre-K through 12. So that constitutes an eligible school. So if you operate one of those 2 child nutrition programs and you are the SFA applying on behalf of the school, you should be good. So then we also have state and local agencies that are eligible, Indian tribal organizations, and small and medium-sized agricultural producers or groups of small and medium-sized agricultural producers, as well as nonprofit entities. So I just want to be clear, sometimes folks when they see agricultural producers are only thinking about kind of the vegetable fruit realm, but that also includes ranchers and fishermen, etc. So broad thought of kind of anybody that's kind of working with food, growing it or harvesting it, or tending to animals that are for human consumption. So folks ask, what's a small or medium-sized agricultural producer? The definition that we've provided for a small or medium-sized agricultural producer hinges on one of two criteria. So your farm would only have to meet one of the two following criteria as it relates to income, which is making up to $1 million in gross agricultural products produced or sold or would have been sold in the previous calendar year. And then if the other criteria would be acreage. So a small or medium farm is any place in which the land acreage is less than 1,582 acres that produced or sold or normally would have sold agricultural products. And again, the intent here is we really want to be targeting our funds to small and local farms that could really use a boost from being connected with additional market opportunities by selling their goods and products in eligible schools. So the acreage, which is here on the screen, is to be a smaller medium farm would be 1,582 acres or less. That was just a question in the box. So I wanted to flag for folks people that or entities that are not eligible as a lead entity. And what I mean by a lead entity, it is the individual or the organization, I should say, it is the organization that is applying for this grant opportunity, submitting the application. So institutions of higher learning, universities, colleges, those are ineligible to be a lead applicant. Cooperative extensions also are ineligible to be a lead applicant. Individual parents, individual teachers, again, this funding is to go to an organization, one of the eligible organizations that we listed before, and hospitals. They are not eligible. So although these folks are not eligible to be a lead applicant, many of them can actually be a key partner and would serve as a really fantastic key partner due to the expertise that they could bring to your farm to school team. So institutions of higher learning have been key partners and often will help out with evaluation. Cooperative extensions can provide really fantastic information about procurement. But however, I want to be clear, again, individuals such as individual parents and individual teachers, they are not eligible to be key partners. Again, this grant opportunity is really for organizations. Okay. So one of the things we want to flag for folks is that grant recipients will be required to participate in any orientation webinar or periodic webinar activities that are held throughout the course of the grant. So those things could look like an onboarding webinar, an evaluation and reporting webinar, or a webinar about procurement or planning. Essentially they are just webinars that provide really fantastic best practices and strategies so that you can have a successful farm to school grant. This particular requirement, the next one that's listed, is just for implementation and planning grantees, and if they are awarded, they are required to attend a face-to-face meeting, which is really our grantee gathering, and that's where we get all of the new implementation and planning grantees together for a 2-day gathering, and we kind of discuss best practices and strategies and provide networking opportunities for folks so that they feel really energized and ready to tackle their grant when they get back home. So with that requirement in mind, if you are applying as an implementation or a planning grantee in your budget, you will have to make sure that you include a line item for the grantee gathering and that you have any associated cost with that itemized in your budget. You can send 1 to 2 individuals to the grantee gathering, but definitely the project director should be the first person listed to go and attend this particular gathering. We do not know where the grantee gathering will be, so we don't have a state to kind of help you estimate, unfortunately, but we typically tell folks to imagine that you are going to be traveling several states away and that the price of tickets will be medium to high priced. You will also, if you are a grantee, be required to complete reporting and evaluation activities, so giving us kind of information throughout your grant on your challenges, your successes, and any change in personnel or budget. And then another important requirement is that you will have to provide at least 25% of the total project cost through matching funds. So this particular funding opportunity, you do have to match 25% of the total project cost from non-federal sources. So I'm going to kind of try to kick up the speed here a little bit because there's still quite a bit to go through. So there are 3 grant tracks to which you can apply as an applicant. So there's the planning, implementation, and training tracks. I want to be clear, the 5 entities that we listed at the top are eligible, but the eligibility actually varies a little bit by grant track. So I'm going to go through the eligibility track by track in a couple of slides. I wanted to flag for folks the distribution of awards. A lot of times people kind of want to know, like, oh, how are you guys divvying out the awards? So typically what we seek to do is to give about 50% of the awards to schools or school districts. And then generally with selection, we also try to make sure that the selections are geographically diverse. We don't want all of our awards to be in California, for example. So we'll try to make sure that there is some diversity if it doesn't naturally pan out. How many projects can I apply for? So sometimes folks really want to hedge their bets by applying to a couple of the grant tracks, and you can only apply to one grant track. So you can only submit one application. So please, choose wisely which of the 3 tracks makes the most sense for what you are seeking to accomplish, and only submit one application. Some people have questions around like, but what if I'm a key partner on multiple projects that are being submitted for this go-around? That's okay. That's fine. What if I am the lead applicant for my own application and I'm also a key partner on a couple of other applications? Again, that is also fine. The key here is you can only submit one application as the lead. So let's hop into planning grants. The funding range for planning grants is $20,000 to $50,000. The grant term is either 12 or 24 months. You select, based on the type of project that you are seeking to do. No more than 10% of the budget can go toward food costs. And they can only be for educational purposes, meaning for taste testing. Funding cannot be used to kind of cover working lunches or food catered to kind of planning meetings. It's really for food that is going to be used as a taste test to determine whether or not it can be, if students like it, and it can be incorporated into the school meals menu. A 25% match is required. It's required for all grant tracks. And equipment is not an allowable expense for planning grants. And I want to be clear, equipment is defined as something that is $5,000 or more in cost. So equipment cannot be purchased if you are a planning grant. And then you are to submit up to 3 letters of commitment. So again, for when you are applying, we are asking for folks to provide letters from key partners that will be on the project, really indicating what is their role in the project, how do they have the expertise to execute that particular role that they'll be doing. And then there's a few other line items in the RFA that kind of tells you exactly what we're looking for in that letter of commitment, but you want to make sure that you have up to 3 letters of commitment included in your grant application package. So planning grants are, you might be saying, well, how do I know if I should apply to a planning grant? A planning grant is really to help you kind of structure your farm to school efforts and maximize them by embedding best practices into the early design of your farm to school project. So planning grants are really fantastic for folks who have limited to no experience in farm to school. You don't have an existing farm to school program. There isn't really much synergy or energy right now around farm to school efforts. So you are really going to use this money to kind of build a cohort of individuals or a farm-to-school team to kind of identify your obstacles, your challenges, to collect data, to understand what kinds of local foods are available in your area, what will your students like, and how can you integrate these efforts to ensure that once your local food comes in, your students are actually going to be consuming it and excited about it. So it's really for those folks who are trying to lay the groundwork for their farm-to-school program. So who can apply? Everybody is eligible. So all of the folks that I listed before, school districts operating the National School Lunch, Breakfast, or Lunch programs, state and local agencies, ITOs, Indian tribal organizations, agricultural producers, and nonprofits. They are all eligible for a planning grant. Planning grants, so what kind of activities are allowable? So again, to kind of get your juices flowing as you're thinking about what your project could be, some of the types of activities we've typically seen under the planning grant track are data collection, engagement with partners in your community and in your school, really identifying what your obstacles and challenges are, doing research to identify what local foods are available in your area, and really figuring out of the obstacles and challenges that have been defined, kind of what would be the plan in place to overcome them. So these are the kinds of activities that folks can kind of do under the planning track. So you could be hosting meetings, going to other schools to understand their farm-to-school program, really bringing additional stakeholders to the table, and really gathering that research to make sure that you can have a well thought out strategic plan for launching your farm-to-school program. One thing I wanted to flag for folks, if you apply to the planning track, you are required to submit a farm-to-school action plan. So all of the activities that you are doing through the course of your planning grant really is going to culminate in the creation of a farm-to-school action plan. And we will have a template of that on our website for all of those who get awarded. So you really want to make sure that your activities are kind of in alignment with being able to produce this farm-to-school action plan. So I would recommend that if you are applying to the planning track, you could take a look at the Farm-to-School action plan template to kind of get a sense of, oh, these are the pieces of information that I would have to have in my plan. So these are the kinds of activities I should be doing through my grant term to be able to create that plan. In addition, I recommend that you take a look at the Farm-to-School Planning Toolkit. All of these things are found on our grant applicant resource page, which I will have a link for that at the end of the presentation. That will really outline for you for each component of that action plan kind of what are the specific kinds of activities that will kind of get you a well thought out course of action in place. So the Farm-to-School Planning Toolkit is a really fantastic resource. So for your proposal narrative for the planning track, we're going to ask you some questions as they relate to your background. We'll want to make sure that we have a good understanding of why you think a planning grant is needed. We'll want to know what are your objectives and what activities are you going to be doing and when. We'll want you to let us know how you're going to evaluate your project. Make sure that you are tracking against the objectives that you had laid out at the outset. What data are you going to collect? Who's going to collect it? That's the kind of information that we'll look for in your evaluation section. Sustainability, we want to know that once we've given you this funding, and it ends, how are you going to continue the project? And then staffing, project management, and quality assurance. We're really going to want to understand, who's on your team, what kind of expertise do they have to kind of carry out the project, and how will you all ensure that the project that you said you were going to do actually gets executed according to the timeline that you laid out in your grant application. So fret not, all of this is found in the RFA. So if you haven't, please make sure that you download the RFA. Even though you're attending this webinar, you still have to read the RFA to make sure you get all of the details. And there's a section in the RFA that discusses the proposal narrative, and for each one of these bullets, it specifically outlines the questions that we want answered and included in the proposal narrative. So the next we have implementation grants. The funding range is $50,000 to $100,000. You can select whether you want to do a 12 or a 24-month grant term. No more than 10% of the budget can go towards food, just like the planning grant, only for educational uses of food. 25% match is required, similar to the planning grant. It's the same across all tracks. And then up to 3 letters of commitment. Again, the same thing that I stated for the planning track in terms of letters of commitment will only be 1 page in length. They should not exceed that, and we'll ask you for very specific pieces of information in that letter of commitment. Please reference the RFA for that. It's the same as the planning track as well. So you might be wondering, okay, well, should I apply for a planning or implementation grant? So implementation grants are really for folks who probably already have an existing farm-to-school program, but they want to scale it further. Or maybe they don't have an existing farm-to-school program, but they have a lot of experience in it. They just haven't launched it yet. So if you feel like you do not need a dedicated 12 or 24-month period of just planning and building support and getting your stakeholders on board and doing your research, and you're ready to hit the ground running, then you apply for an implementation grant. As you notice, implementation grant has a higher cap, so you can apply up to $100,000 for this particular track. And it's really well suited for folks that are already operating a farm-to-school program or have a lot of experience. So all of the folks that were eligible for a planning grant are the same folks that are eligible for an implementation grant. So all of the eligible entities can apply for an implementation grant. So implementation allowable activities, I'm going to try to run through this really quickly, but y'all can definitely come back and take a look at this slide to kind of get the juices flowing for your projects. But some types of activities that fit really well under implementation track include funding the operation of service projects that will support farm-to-school initiatives in schools. So whether that is agricultural education or it's learning that's associated with a school garden, having volunteers come in and work with students to kind of really get them engaged with where their food is coming from and how it grows, are all things that would be fundable, so to speak. Fundable, I don't even know if that's a word, under the implementation track. A couple of other activities is aggregating local food supply so that it can more effectively meet the needs of school districts. So for school districts, sourcing local food, sometimes a challenge can be meeting their minimum requirement. So perhaps there's an organization that can look and see, wow, there are a number of small producers in this area. What if we created a food hub or some other way of kind of aggregating all of that local food supply so we can better serve the schools and other entities if they so choose, but for the purposes of our grant, serve schools local foods in the area. Also thinking about, I don't want to read everything off this slide, but these fundings really can be used for a wide range of things. So building networks, maybe a statewide or regional network or coalition that shares best practices around farm-to-school activities. This funding could be used for providing technical support, so maybe developing resources or toolkits or consultations or webinars that people can use in your state, in your region to do farm-to-school work and really addresses the unique needs of your state or community or region. Really thinking about promotional campaigns. A lot of times this is, state agencies are really well positioned for this. So applying for funding that can develop a marketing campaign that really excites the state or the region to serve local foods in schools and make it accessible and create posters and kind of social media messages that are already packaged. You really can be creative about how these funds are used to move forward farm-to-school momentum in among your target audience. So the implementation proposal narrative has several pieces here. Farm-to-school experience, the need, what are you doing for your project, which will also include your objectives, timeline, activities, evaluation, sustainability, all the same things as you can see as the planning grant, very similar. But the questions are different. So again, the RFA has this all outlined very clearly, so go ahead and reference the RFA for the specific information that we're looking for under each of these subsections for the proposal narrative. Last but not least are training grants. The funding range for training grants are $20,000 to $50,000. They are for trainings that would be state, regional, or national in focus. And I want to be clear about regional. Regional meaning that training is available to folks in more than one state. So perhaps it's 2 states, 3 states, but it's 2 or more states that would be targeted for the training. The grant term is 12 months for a training grant. Again, 25% match is required. And one letter of support, notice it's called support, one letter of support is required. And this is a little bit different from the planning and implementation track, in which this letter, again, only one page, but this would come from a potential training attendee. And that letter would really state why this training would be helpful or useful to this attendee or the community. They would kind of be the voice for, yes, this is needed and this is why this training would be really fantastic to have. So training grants are really intended to support state, regional, and national trainings that provide technical assistance in a number of key areas related to farm to school, which would include training on local procurement, food safety, school gardens, culinary education, or the integration of agricultural-based curriculum. So really thinking about what are the gaps in people's skills or knowledge as it relates to farm to school, to have the farm to school vision come together in a particular state, region, or community. I should say state, region, or multi-state area. And how could that training kind of meet that gap? It's really intended for organizations that are well positioned to have the expertise to execute on this training and to kind of coalesce all of these different partners or the target partners to this training. So who can apply? So this is the only grant track type in which everyone is not eligible. 4 of the 5 entities are eligible for training grants. So nonprofits, state and local agencies, Indian tribal organizations, and agricultural producers are eligible for training grants. So some allowable activities for training, TA, you can do TA that addresses local procurement, training events that bring together stakeholders from across the supply chain, really giving them the opportunity to connect with one another and kind of understand their different languages, or in order to break down some of those barriers that prevent a farm to school vision from forming and happening in a given state or region. Training on school garden development and food agriculture curriculum, as well as culinary training or educational activities, training of food service staff members on knife skills and things related to processing local foods. So the training proposal narrative has a couple of key parts that have to be included. Again, in the RFA we clearly state the questions that we have under each of these subsections. So please reference the RFA to get a clear understanding of the different pieces of information that we would like under each of these subsections. And on this slide we just kind of condensed all of the grant track information into one place so you could kind of compare and contrast and see the differences. So quick updates for FY 2019. So actually the FY 2019 RFA remains largely the same from last year. A couple of key differences. We provided an updated definition for agricultural producer. We wanted to clarify that agricultural producers included those that worked with animals, so ranchers and fishermen. So we just kind of made sure to kind of clearly state that in the RFA. We also shortened the required length for each application. We really wanted to get lean, mean applications. And also it'll be less work for folks, shorter applications to prepare. So for the implementation grant track, your proposal narrative cannot exceed 6 pages. For the planning track, your proposal narrative cannot exceed 4, and then for training, it cannot exceed 4 as well. So if you are looking to kind of refresh an application that you did last year and submit it for this year, please make sure that you are meeting the maximums, that you're within the limits, because anything beyond that maximum will not be considered. We also wanted to make it a little easy for folks who are trying to figure out, man, where do I kind of focus a lot of my efforts when I'm writing my application for the proposal narrative, since there are multiple sections. So for each section, we actually provided a suggested word length. You are permitted to go over or under that suggested word limit for the section, but your whole entire proposal narrative cannot exceed these page limits listed here. In addition, we set a maximum on the number of letters of commitment or support because we just really wanted to make sure that applications were very focused. So a maximum of 3 letters of commitment. So for the planning and implementation track, no more than 3 letters of commitment. For the training track, no more than 1 letter of support. And we are putting a maximum on the number of resumes that can be submitted with a grant application, which will be 3. So you want to be very strategic in the resumes that you are submitting with your grant application. Obviously the folks who have more responsibility, probably the folks for which you'd want to include a resume. In the past we had an optional attachment section that kind of allowed folks to attach any additional materials they wanted to share with the panel, the review panel. But this year we will not be accepting kind of extra optional attachments. We only want the specific kind of requirements and information that is directly requested in the RFA. Since we shortened the maximum length for the proposal narratives, we did revise the proposal narrative questions a little bit, so make sure that you take a look at that in the RFA. If you are revamping an old application, make sure that you are directly answering the questions that are listed in the RFA for that particular grant track opportunity. And then we also just provided some additional guidance regarding allowable costs for equipment and supplies. So go ahead and take a look at the RFA for that. Sometimes people have a bit of trouble estimating how to allocate costs for certain pieces of equipment that might be used not only for our grant, but maybe for other purposes that aren't directly related with our grant. So we provided some guidance there in the RFA regarding that. The FY 2019 priorities, we are prioritizing school districts. We are also prioritizing applications from Indian tribal organizations, as well as applications that are serving tribal communities. So if your target audience, if at least 50% of that target audience is from a tribe or is a tribal community, then that application would receive priority designation. We are also prioritizing projects that reach more than one school and that serve a high proportion of children that are eligible for free or reduced priced meals. And so what do we mean by a high proportion? We say at least 40% or more of the students targeted would be eligible for free or reduced price meals. So how to apply? I'm going to transition this to Carla.
Thank you, Maika, and hello to everyone who's watching the presentation. We are going to be going over how to apply for the grant and what that entails specifically. So as you see here, there's a couple steps that you need to make sure you go through before you can submit through grants.gov, and we want to make sure we cover those thoroughly with everyone so they're aware of the different systems that are required prior to the submission. So you see them listed out here in the steps. There is you do have to register with DUNS, your DUNS number, and then you register with the SAM site, you create a grants.gov account, and then there's also the e-business point of contact that is updated through grants.gov. And of course you are going to hopefully complete and submit your application online. We did want to highlight that grants.gov, who hosts its own portal, does have 24/7 support, so they're available at that 1-800 number that you see here, and that is going to be your best bet if you're running into issues directly through grants.gov, that you contact them directly, as well as the support email, but I think the number is probably going to be your best bet if you're having, if you need assistance with anything. Okay. So Maika, I am going to ask you to, oh, it did change, sorry. So it took a little bit of time. So now it's step 1. We are going to be going over the first step. Initially what you want to do is you want to register with the Dun Bradstreet site, and This is a complete and separate step from SAM itself, so we want to emphasize that there's two separate steps here. If you don't already have a DUNS number, you do need to obtain one. That's going to be your first step. You want to go to the Dun Bradstreet website, and that is on here. It's the www.dnb.com site. Make sure you do that first. And because applying for a federal grant is going to take several steps, and with other organizations and websites, we're just asking you to become familiar with the different portals initially if you're going to be the one applying on behalf of your agency. So when you do go on Dun & Bradstreet, there is a DUNS number that's going to be a unique 9-digit number that's going to be used to track your credit file. And it's going to enable yourself as an entity as well as other organizations to kind of look at your financial stability. So if you will just make sure that you do that, you should be on to the next step, which at that point would be to register with SAM. Something to keep in mind is each individual site has their own process in terms of timeline, so you do want to give yourself enough cushion, and we'll talk a lot about that in between in terms of time frame. But yeah, so DUNS is initial, then you can move on to the SAM registration, which is a system for reward management. All the organizations that receive funds from the government have to have a SAM account. Keep in mind that this is a free account, as are all the accounts that we're asking you to use. To register, you're going to need your DUNS number when you're registering for SAM. So again, it's important that you do these in chronological order for that reason. You're also going to need your taxpayer identification number. That's the TIN number or your EIN number, and your bank's routing number, account number, and account type. All this information is taken through the SAM account information, which is what the government uses to conduct business. So again, very important that you get these two things done initially. Also, something to keep in mind is SAM and the DUNS information will transfer to SAM, and that's when you will put your MPIN number from SAM's. Another note that we had was that applicants often think the initial email from SAM is it, and you don't need to do anything further. The initial email usually contains the instructions that are going to tell you what you need to do next. So keep that in mind. Just make sure you're reading those emails thoroughly. And again, SAM has its own steps, and it could take a little bit of time. So just be on the lookout for those emails from SAM. We have a note here that they can take up to several weeks to complete, so it's important to start this process as soon as possible. We, as an organization, have noticed sometimes organizations or applicants don't make enough time for this, and so we don't want anybody falling behind, and then this could prevent you from submitting your application. So keep that in mind. It's best to start early. And so we're just emphasizing the time. You know, the timeline for the submission of the grant is everything, so we are recommending that you take at least 3 weeks for this process. If you know, depending on where your organization is at in this process, if you're just starting, you definitely need to make provisions for those 3 weeks. And then once you're registered, you have your DUNS number, you've registered on SAM, then you can create a grants.gov account. So this is kind of a screenshot of where you would typically go, and there is a how to register in grants.gov video that we recommend you look at. Grants.gov has wonderful resources online that you can take a look at in terms of registration. So again, I would highly encourage you guys to take a look at that. All right, and I think we do have some other instructions. When you register on the grants.gov site, you're going to need to make sure that you register with the Dun & Bradstreet and SAM first. You're going to need your DUNS number before you can even begin to get on the grants.gov account. And once again, like we've emphasized already, that can take a few weeks. So start as soon as possible. So let me move forward. All right. And then this is something that's done through grants.gov, step 4, which is the EBIS point of contact. You need to make sure that after you've completed this particular step, that you've registered with grants.gov, then your EBIS point of contact is going to be the single individual at your organization who's going to be approving the other users that are going to be able to use this shared site for federal grants on behalf of the organization. So they're basically the key roles, such as your authorized organization representative, and the AOR is the individual who's permitted to submit the grants.gov application on behalf of your organization. So just if you're a big organization, make sure you're mindful of that. A lot of times the organizations like a school district may already have a designated person, so you need to just be aware of who that is so that you can be in contact. This is so important because sometimes an individual submits the grants.gov application for their organization, but if they're not the AOR, grants.gov will reject the application. So in many cases, people often submit right before the deadline, and at this time the organization might not be able to update the AOR, which could have changed, and so then the deadline passes. So it's just something to keep in mind. You know, there's a couple of nuances to that if you're not prepared, but if you're prepared, you should be just fine. There's also a YouTube video online where you can look at how to exactly do that through the internet, so we recommend you do that as well if you're going to be updating a point of contact. You should probably still go on here and check who your point of contact is either way. And then finally, once you've been able to master all those steps, you can move on to step 5, which is to complete and submit your application. You know, part of that is going to entail a couple things. There's a Workspace online collaborative environment that is used. And something to keep in mind, grants.gov no longer provides the traditional PDF package upload. So all applications must be using the Workspace environment. There is a video on Workspace that grants.gov has provided with their experts that pretty much manage this on their end, and also tutorials on how to submit this as well. Let's see. Sorry, I'm just trying to navigate the link here. So it's 5. All right. And then finally, we want you to verify successfully the submission and acceptance. And I cannot emphasize how important this is. You know, after you submit your application, you're going to receive several emails from grants.gov. The first email simply states that grants.gov has received your application and is verifying if there are any errors with the grant package. So that is not the receipt for that, and you need to pay attention to that. But then grants.gov will send another email, a validation email, which is going to indicate if there are errors or not in your application. This email will indicate that the application was successfully accepted by grants.gov. So because we have a lot of applications, please keep in mind that you should be receiving a confirmation email from grants.gov. And if you don't, then you would definitely need to get on the phone and call them as soon as possible because you should have that. If you aren't sure, then again, you should have this receipt. A lot of times this trips people up a lot, and we just want you to have a successful application accepted. So again, we don't want you to get confused in between these two emails. One of them is just stating that it received your application, and it's verifying the errors. Wait until you get the validation email to confirm that it's been submitted. If it, for whatever reason, it has not gone through, sometimes folks will get an indication rejection, and that will state the reason that it did not go through. Therefore, once again, we recommend that you submit the application earlier, 1 to 2 weeks prior to submission, in case you have to make updates to your SAM account or update the AOR designation, or the EBIS point account. If their EBIS point of contact is out of town, once again, you want to make provisions for all that. And then common submission errors. So these are a couple of the things that we have encountered. Folks will sometimes email us for, the expired SAM, incorrect AOR designations. Therefore, they can't submit. If you have an expired SAM, you won't be able to submit an application either. The naming convention, if you use special characters when you save your files through grants.gov, you might get an error, so follow the naming convention that they use. Late submission, obviously the grant deadline is going to cut off online once that's expired, and then if, wait till the last minute and you run into something, it's too late to fix it. So just to keep in mind, these things, your SAM has to be up to date at the time of submission. So when you register for SAM, SAM has an expiration date, and so if it's prior to the deadline, even though you might have a SAM registration, if it expires before the deadline and you go in and submit, you will not be able to submit. So take a look at that date when you're going into SAM as well, and be aware of it, and make sure that it goes beyond the deadline of the grant. Someone that submits the grant application but that's not able to submit on behalf of the agency would be another reason that you might not be able to submit on grants.gov. We've seen that happen a couple times. And finally, what we were speaking about was that naming the convention of the name, the special characters or symbols. If you name your file a specific file and you have a special character or a symbol, this causes the system to reject the application. So we've seen this error come back to grantees as well. So please don't use any special symbols in the file name for the application. The RFA lists a number of common symbol characters not to use, so when in doubt, you can refer back to that. But again, the list is not exhaustive, so just don't use any would be our recommendation. And when in doubt, you can always contact grants.gov if you're having issues with your files. And finally, yes, if you submit the application after the deadline, it will close, so you won't be able to go on there. I think that is pretty much kind of the main causes. In terms of required forms, the application package information is going to be in the RFA, so this is coming directly from the RFA package itself. If you need to have this information, you probably should print it out prior to submission. It kind of just spells out some of the required forms here. So, of course, you have the standard application family forms, the federal forms, the SF424, the 424A, and the 424B. All those forms will be part of your application package, and it is required, so you'll see them when you go into the system. Disclosure of lobbying activities, that's your SFLLL. And then finally, we have a grant program accounting system and financial capability questionnaire. This particular form, you need to be aware, it does require signature, and this is probably going to be, this will be outside of grants.gov, so you'll have to scan that form and upload it. So I just want to make sure you guys are aware, because if it doesn't have signature, that you'll see it when you go to the form itself. It requires your authorized point of contact at your agency will have to sign that. And then the Farm to School cover sheet, that's also online on grants.gov. And finally, we have the other attachments, which is your project narrative, your budget narrative. Your project narrative is just going to spell out the project itself, and you have to make sure you meet the parameters that we'll cover in a little bit in terms of what page limitations and whatnot. Budget narrative also has those, so keep that in mind. And then, of course, the signed letters verifying your matching funds for each cash or in-kind contributions. We expect to see that in there. And then the signed letters of commitment from your partners and collaborator organizations. Staff resumes to support your project. And if you are requesting indirect costs, we are asking for an approved negotiated indirect cost. Please also check the date on that. We want to make sure it's not an expired one. And again, if you need this list for reference, you can see the application checklist on page 4 of the RFA. It's on section 4.4 of the RFA. And then we do have other required forms. This is only applicable for profit and nonprofit corporations. So that would be the 80-30-30. And if you're a 501c3 nonprofit organization, we would need that determination IRS letter. So make sure you submit that. And if you're not sure, again, this is also on page 4, section 4.4, if it's applicable to your organization. And we also have the required format. We have the table of contents, the narrative response, and I believe we may have covered this, but yeah, implementation has a 6-page maximum, and planning has a 4-page maximum, and then training is a 4-page maximum. And then, of course, it has to be on an 8.5 by 11 and 12-point font, Times New Roman, and we please number your pages so we can reference those when we're reviewing the application. And finally, we are recommending that you label each section and subsection so we can refer to it as we're looking through the applications themselves. And if you want to refer back to the section, all this information is again on page 4 and section 4.4 of the RFA. Finally, just to reiterate that, the grants.gov is going to expire at 11:59 p.m. December 4th, 2018. So just be aware that the deadline will expire, and after that time, Eastern Standard Time, you will not be able to submit. There's a couple tips here that we wanted to point out. You can email us if you're having issues with the application process. However, if it's a very specific DUNS number question, SAMS, or grants.gov, keep in mind that all of the different websites have their individual numbers, and you should probably call the helplines immediately so you can get that resolved. But if you're having application process emails, like if you're trying to do something to grants.gov, locate the application or something like that, you can email us. But just keep in mind that DUN, SAM, and grants.gov run their own sites, and so they have their own personnel on their end that can assist you. And finally, just keep in mind that naming convention, we see that a lot where folks are trying to submit last minute and they forget the naming convention and they might enter a symbol and then they have an error and they can't submit. So something to just keep in the back of your mind if you're that person submitting. And finally, if you submit your application 1 week early, you will be fine because then you'll give yourself plenty of cushion. So the best tip we can give you is just submit early, and we're hoping that you have a successful application process. And finally, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over now to Maika Sanderson. She's going to go over other application resources. Thank you.
Thanks, Carla. So I see that, as always, we have run out of time. It is 2:02. There are just a handful of slides that kind of put some resources out there for you all, and we do have a lot of questions. So I just want to say for folks who have to get off the line, we will be posting the slides and this recording on the Farm to School website. So go ahead and just go to the Farm to School website, Grant Program Applicant Resources, and you will find all of this fantastic information. I'll also be sure to follow up with all the folks that registered for this particular webinar and email them the PDF of the slides and the link of the webinar recording once it is available. So really quickly, some resources that we wanted to flag for you all. Please subscribe to the e-letter, the DIRT, if you haven't already. Besides just kind of getting the going-ons of the Office of Community Food Systems and kind of what's new and happening in Farm to School, we also will post updates about the Farm to School grant program during this period. I mean, we do it all year round, but particularly we will update the FAQ probably on a biweekly basis, and we'll just flag that for our subscribers in the DIRT. And that information will also be on our website. But if you're subscribed, you will kind of get it right to your inbox, and you'll be like, oh, I should go check out the FAQs to see if there's anything new in there or information I need. This page is going to be your best friend during the RFA open period as you're creating your application. So the Grant Applicant Resource page is chock full of really fantastic resources about how to submit a grant application, so a SAM.gov one-sheeter, just the Farm to School Planning Toolkit. It just has various fantastic pieces of information that will be really helpful for you as you're going through the process of putting together an application and submitting it. So please make sure to check this website. In addition, more importantly, I strongly recommend for all folks to download the FAQ. The FAQ has a lot of really fantastic information and will probably answer many of the questions that you already have and want to send to us. It'll already be in that document. So just do a control find and see if it's in there first. And if it's not, please reach out to us. We definitely want to support you throughout the process. We also just wanted to flag for you that the Office of Community Food Systems has 6 fantastic staff who we call regional leads for each of the FNS regions. So they are also available to field questions. Just wanted to make you aware that there is a team and there are experts experts in your region. I do want to be clear that the questions that you ask us should really be related to kind of the logistics of applying to our grant program. We unfortunately as the government cannot provide you kind of hand-holding about how to put together your application in terms of like who should be on your team and this is what you should do, because we don't want to give any one applicant an unfair advantage. But if you're like, what do I do on grants.gov, or I don't understand this thing in the RFA, am I allowed to insert the question? If you've already checked the FAQ and you can't find an answer there, you can go ahead and reach out to the team. So these are the regional leads, but the first line of defense, so to speak, can definitely be us here in national office, and you can reach us at farmtoschool@usda.gov. We also have an alternate email address, farmtoschool@fns.usda.gov, and that'll be on the last slide. So we are going to transition to questions at this point. We have a lot of questions, which is great. That means y'all have been listening and on the edge of your seats as we went through this incredible amount of information. So I just quickly want to see what we can touch on. If you have to hop off, we will not be offended. And if we don't get to your question, we will make sure to email you a response directly. So let's get started. So we have a question here. Do tribal organizations have to work with schools? This is a really good question. So tribal organizations do not have to work with schools, but whatever project that they are supporting should really be in alignment with the intent of the grant program, which is to increase access to local foods in eligible schools. So perhaps you have a project where you may want to work with tribal agricultural producers. You most certainly can have agricultural producers be your target audience for whatever project that you are doing, but it should be supporting the ultimate goal of helping them to get local produce into the school meals program. So I hope that was helpful there. Someone asked, is there a job opening in the Marrow region? So we had a transition of one of our regional leads out of Marrow. So unfortunately, that position is vacant at the time. So no job has been posted at this point. I see, can building and expanding school gardens qualify for an implementation grant? Yes. Building and expanding school gardens can in fact be an allowable activity for an implementation grant. I want to encourage again folks to really think about the intent of the grant program. That is certainly in alignment, but take it to the next level and expanding a school garden, but also include how you're going to get the food that's harvested in your school garden into the school meals program, or how it could be a source of taste testing. Again, really making sure that you're connecting that school garden increase into actually getting local food into the school meals program. It just gives you a better opportunity to be funded. Can cooperative extension personnel provide the match? So I kind of almost want to kick this to Carla. So the question, Carla, here is, can cooperative extension personnel provide the match? My understanding is it doesn't matter from who the match is coming from as long as the match is non-federal funding. But I defer to you, Carla.
No, I don't think we are. If you're collaborating with other partners, it's fine. I think the key there is just verifying that they're not federal. So that's correct, and that they're not coming from a federal. So basically, the federal funds with other federal funds. So you should just verify where the stream of funding is coming from, basically.
Great. We have a question that asks, can you work with agricultural producers that are larger than the definition of small or mid-sized as defined in the RFA, as long as they are not considered key project partners? So ideally, we would want so no, you cannot. So the idea is that your project really should be targeting and supporting small and mid-sized agricultural producers. So even though they are not the lead applicant, if you are looking to target agricultural producers through your project, you should be targeting those that are small and medium-sized. It is possible that you may have a partner as a part of your farm to school team that doesn't meet that definition, and that is fine, but the beneficiaries of your project should really be small or medium-sized agricultural producers. I have a question here that says, can match be in kind? Carla?
Yes, match can be in kind.
Okay. When will an organization know the status of application if we'll receive funding? So I believe this person is just asking, when will you know that you've been selected or not? So on the RFA, we state that we will seek to announce in May. In the years that I have been involved with this process, typically we end up awarding in June. So usually by the end of June you know if you've been selected for a farm to school grant or not. Where would you like page numbers? So I think Word typically has a feature that just allows you to insert page numbers on every page, and then we also request a table of contents. So your first page should have that information. And actually all of this like formatting nitty-gritty information can be found directly in the RFA. So please reference the RFA for application format questions. How have other grantees met the 25% matching funds? Carla, you look at these a lot more than I do. Can you provide some examples as to how people come up with the 25% match?
Sure. So, someone just mentioned in-kind, and then you have the actual fund. So you can do either or if you have and so many ways, because we have many applicants. Let me just answer that. There's more than one way to do this. So if you have an organization that's going to contribute funds, for example, they're going to give you some staff that is going to directly impact your program, then you can count that. Other folks have, they might contribute actual funds, so they might actually give your organization money to run a project that you guys are working on collaboratively on Farm to School, or it can be volunteers. When you're doing volunteers and in-kind, you just need to keep in mind that, you need to meet that the monetary amount or that 25%. And so, again, a combination. And I believe we do have the resources online with the examples, but I could be wrong. And Micah, you'll have to kind of weigh in on that. I'm pretty sure we have that on an FAQ of some sort of examples, but I could be wrong. If not, we can add and elaborate on that if we need to do that.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I am not sure if it's included in the FAQ, but I can certainly double check, and if it's not, we could put some examples in there for folks.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that. But there's so many ways that grantees meet it that, again, we have so many applicants. So just keep in mind that you need to do what works for your organization and what's going to be make your program or your application itself successful. And you want to make sure you can meet that requirement because it is a requirement of the grant. So something that's going to feasibly work for you.
Great. So just quickly, someone asked, where is the face-to-face meeting for planning and implementation grantees? The state has not been determined at this time yet, so we just ask folks to kind of make an estimation. There is more detail in the FAQ about how to make that estimation, so please reference that, which is found on the grant applicant resource page. We have a question, what is the matching amount? It's 25% of the total cost. On the grant applicant resource page, there's a budget matching tool that you can use to determine for your project how much would you have to contribute to meet that 25% match. So good afternoon. Would you please expand on the non-federal sources for the 25% matching? Carla?
Okay, so I'm going to elaborate on the question. Hopefully this is what you mean. So in terms of non-federal sources, we just basically are making sure that you're not using federal funds for the match. So in other words, it could be a collaboration with some other organization, so you need to just kind of take a look at the actual funding source. And if you have a specific question and something that you're not sure, you're like, okay, I'm not sure if this is going to qualify, you can always email us if it's something very specific. But basically, you need to make sure it's non-federal funds. And I do believe we have a Q&A on that online. We can elaborate if you still have a question about that after the presentation.
Thanks, Carla. So are local county agencies who are currently awarded USDA SNAP Ed funding eligible to apply for the USDA Farm to School grant? Yes, yes they are. Is a coalition that has not yet received nonprofit 501c3 but has a fiscal sponsor eligible to apply? Fiscal sponsors are permitted for this grant opportunity, but the entity for which the fiscal sponsor is kind of overseeing or over, that entity still has to be eligible. So if you still do not have your nonprofit 501c3 at the time that the RFA closes, then you would be ineligible for the grant. Let's see here. I'm trying to see. So our school has lots going on with health, wellness, and environmental literacy. I'm not sure whether to apply for planning or implementation. However, we have not done farm to school programming through grants. It's mostly curriculum activities and service learning projects. Can you speak more about why one grant would be more appropriate than the other? From what was described here, essentially if you do not have any farm to school experience, it sounds like you have a lot of curriculum, educational, environmental background. If you need 12 or 24 months to strategically plan and figure out how to develop curriculum or fit your curriculum into kind of agricultural education and making that linkage with the farm to school concepts, then maybe you want to do a planning grant. But if you feel like you don't need the space to just kind of plan and strategically gather information to kind of make that vision come to life, then you would apply to an implementation grant. So it really just depends on your expertise and what stage or level of readiness you are at. But if you have additional questions, feel free to email the Farm to School inbox, and perhaps I could provide a little bit more information there. But can you purchase equipment in the implementation grant? Yes, yes you can. If you receive a planning grant, what is the general way that such planning is implemented? I.e., is there any priority for implementation grant funding? No. So our grant funding is not supposed to be viewed as a sequential source of funding, but a one-time infusion of funds for a particular program. So you do not receive any advantage in our evaluation and scoring process for having been a planning grantee. We actually really try to award to folks who have not received funding from us in the past, just because we have such a high demand and limited funding. Our new schools starting lunch/breakfast programs eligible? So again, kind of at the close of the RFA, if you are operating a national school lunch or breakfast program, it's recognized by your local state agency as being a part of the national the federal child nutrition programs, then you are good to go. You are eligible. It's just key that you are operating one of those two programs by the time the RFA closes on December 4th. Let's see. In order to apply for the training grant, do we need to have previous experience in farm to school or have been previously funded for farm to school planning or implementation grants? No you do not. You will see through the project proposal narrative, we do want an understanding of your expertise or ability to kind of provide training on whatever topic that you said that you would be providing training on, or who are the folks that you would be kind of having to disseminate that information. But no, you do not. You are not required to have been a former farm to school planning or implementation grant to be a training grant. Are the page maximum requirements include double spacing or single spacing? Bum, bum, bum. Good question. So the maximum page lengths are taking into consideration that you would be single spaced. But let me double check that, because I need to kind of take a look at the guidance we gave last year. So I will get back to you, and I will make sure to include that in the FAQs. How do we submit the application? Through grants.gov, or do we connect with our USDA state representatives to ask them to send us the forms? I'm going to just kick that to you, Carla, since you were
Yeah, I
talking
mean,
a bit
all
about that.
applications have to be submitted through grants.gov. So again, we went through those steps today, and if you're not the point of contact or that AOR for your organization, I think step one might be for you to find out who that AOR is, meaning the main point of contact. Again, if you're at a district, there's probably already, like I'm giving you an example, a school district already assigned through grants.gov, because all organizations, for the most part, federal government organizations will use grants.gov as a web portal where everyone submits. As you saw, there's a lot of requirements that go into submitting through grants.gov, and grants.gov will catch all that. So again, if your DUNS number is out, you don't have a DUNS number, or your SAM is expired, all that information will be caught when you submit it through the web portal. So it's a required system, and we use it as an agency. So the bottom line is you've got to go through grants.gov. If you're not sure who submits on behalf of your organization, you probably need to find out, at the head, from your head folks there, or your directors, to kind of get an idea, whoever your point of contact is for grants. Might be a good start.
Someone asked, thanks, can a private school participating in NSLP apply? Yes. Private schools are operating NSLP or National School Breakfast Program are eligible to apply. How long are the DUN and SAM numbers good for? If my organization applied for a Farm to School grant last year, do we use the same SAM and DUN numbers?
You might be able to, but that's why we emphasize that depending on everybody's on a different timeline. So you might have applied in December, someone else in December. I don't have that time frame if it's a year or 2 year thing. So you probably need to just go ahead and check your specific profile on SAM, and same thing with the DUNS. And it will actually show your expiration date when you log on. So it's pretty straightforward. You go into your profile, and it will show an expiration date. So everybody's going to be all over the map in terms of dates. Time frame, I could double check that to see if there's like a consistent time frame. But as far as your specific date, you need to be aware of that. Like I said, sometimes folks don't expect it to be expired, and it's expired, and you won't be able to submit. So you can check that if you log on to your specific system with your user ID and your profile information.
Thanks, Carla. Is there a specific amount of funding allocated per state or per districts within the same state? No, there isn't. There is not. Can a smaller nonprofit 501c3 that doesn't have a previous formal audit apply? Carla, do you want to answer this, or do you want me to answer this? I think I saw this in the FAQ.
And I don't want to say exactly because I don't have it in front of me. So if you'll go ahead and say it if you have it, because I don't have it in front of me. But
yeah, no problem. So the yes. A smaller nonprofit that doesn't have a previous formal audit apply, yes, they can. According to the FAQ, grant applicants are not required to have received an audit prior to being selected for a USDA Farm to School grant. So you are good to go. However, under federal audit requirements, Circular A-133, recipient institutions that expend $500,000 or more per year in federal funds must have a single or program-specific audit for that year. So we have FAQs for things like this. Someone asked, did you say University Cooperative Extension cannot apply even when the work is with the school district? Unfortunately, that is correct. They cannot apply as the lead applicant. However, the Cooperative Extension can be a key partner. What will the budget period be when we receive funds if awarded? Carla, did you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I want to kind of get your feedback in terms of the different type of projects, because I've normally seen that it varies by the type of project and obviously the funding amount. Training grants tend to be a less amount, so most of those grants are 1-year projects, and then implementation, correct me if I'm wrong, typically runs 2 years. And I know the information is also online in the RFA, so I don't want to quote myself.
Yeah, no, sorry, and I should push that on you. Yes, that's correct. So training grants are 12 months only. Planning and implementation tracks are 12 or 24 months. So the budget period is, the period of the grant term, but realistically it takes grantees 6 to 8 weeks to get into all of the required federal systems that are required for managing a grant, including the system that allows you to draw down the funds. So realistically, you won't be able to draw down funding probably until 2, maybe even 3 months after you've been awarded. So typically, I think in the RFA it states when your timeline should start, but I'm pretty sure we say July 1st of 2019 should be the start time for your project timeline. But please reference the RFA. Okay, we are excessive. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Carla.
I was going to say, when we award, we will definitely, keep that in mind. So even if you put like March of, 2019, we will update that to the actual award date. So in terms of these specific time frames, just stick to those time frames that Maika's talking about. Your timeline needs to match your budgetary period, obviously. So make sure both align. Thanks.
Perfect. Great. So there are a couple more questions, and I think what we'll do for these is we'll email these out, and if they seem like a question that lots of people can benefit from, we will make sure to put it in the FAQ document. We are almost 30 minutes over. I wanted to thank everybody for hanging in there with us. We are so excited to see so many folks on this first webinar, and we will send you all positive energy as you kind of get your teams together and start to think about what fantastic projects you're going to propose. We're really looking forward to reviewing it. Again, if you have questions, email us at farmtoschool@usda.gov. And please review the FAQ document and check out our applicant resource page. So we hope you all have a great day.
Thank you.